I used to think the worst pain a mother could endure was watching her child cry, helpless and small in the cradle. I never imagined that decades later, after raising them, feeding them, clothing them, and giving them the very marrow of my soul, the deepest wound would come not from strangers or enemies, but from those I once held against my chest. I'm a woman of 70 years now, gray hair spilling like smoke over my shoulders, skin weathered by time, heart bruised by betrayals I still can't comprehend. And yet, as I sit here telling this story, it feels as though the scars are still fresh, the wounds unhealed, and the echoes of my children's voices still sharp in my ears. My name is Ruth. I was born in a small town, raised in a family that taught me hard work and sacrifice were the only things a person could truly count on. My father worked in the factory until his hands were calloused beyond repair. And my mother stitched clothes for neighbors until her eyes went weak from squinting under a single lamp. I carried those lessons into my own life: work hard, love harder, and never let your family suffer if you could help it. And that belief became the center of everything I was, everything I did, everything I gave. When I married Charles, a man with a smile that could light up the darkest room, I thought life had finally handed me something beautiful. We weren't rich. We lived paycheck to paycheck, scraping by on his job as a mechanic and my hours at the local library. But we were happy, or at least I thought we were. 3 children came along: my eldest, Daniel, who carried his father's charm, but also his recklessness; my middle child, Sarah, who always seemed to want more from life than what we could give; and my youngest, Michael, quiet and thoughtful, who clung to me as though I was the only anchor he had. I poured myself into motherhood, sometimes too much, sometimes to the point where I disappeared beneath the weight of their needs. I cooked, I cleaned, I worked double shifts, I stayed up at night to mend clothes. I denied myself new shoes so they could have textbooks, and I prayed over every scraped knee and every fever. I never asked for much in return, only respect, honesty, and love. But respect eroded quietly, honesty decayed slowly, and love turned into something sharp-edged, something that cut deeper than I thought possible. It began the day I opened the first letter from the bank. I remember it vividly, because it was the first time I felt my knees weaken under the weight of words on a page. The envelope bore my name in neat black print. Inside was a notice overdue payments, a warning of penalties, a reminder of debts I had no memory of signing. I thought it was a mistake. I had never borrowed money beyond what I could repay. I was raised with the belief that debt was a prison, and I avoided it as one avoids fire. I placed the letter on the counter, my hands trembling. I told myself it was a clerical error, that tomorrow it would resolve itself. But tomorrow brought another letter, and the day after, another. They came in a steady stream, each one slicing a little deeper into my peace, until the stack grew thick enough to bury the truth I tried to deny: my name. My signature, my identity had been used. At first, I thought it was strangers, identity theft, fraud. I reported it. I went to the bank, clutching the papers like evidence in a trial where I was both the victim and the accused. I pleaded with the clerk, a young woman who barely looked at me as she tapped her keyboard. She shook her head, showed me forms with my handwriting, my name, my address, my details. I stared at them until my vision blurred. The signatures were mine, but not mine. I knew the swoop of my R, the way I crossed my T. But these, they looked forced, mimicked, someone who knew me well enough to copy. It wasn't until weeks later, when the truth peeled itself open like a festering wound, that I realized who it was. Not strangers, not outsiders, my children. The discovery came in pieces. A receipt in Daniel's jacket pocket, a call from the bank about an auto loan tied to my name, a confrontation where Sarah's voice cracked as she admitted she just needed help, that she thought I wouldn't notice, that it was only temporary. Michael, sweet Michael, remained silent, but silence is its own confession. He had known, he had watched, he had let it happen. I remember standing in the middle of my kitchen, the very room where I had once fed them spoonfuls of soup and wiped their mouths with the corner of my apron, now trembling with the knowledge that the children I gave life to had chained me to debts I never chose. My voice rose, cracked, fell, begged for answers. Why? Why would you do this to me? Daniel looked away, his jaw tight. You wouldn't have given it if we asked. You're too strict. Sarah, tears brimming, said, You had good credit. We didn't. It was just to help us get started. We were going to pay it back. And Michael, my quiet boy, whispered, I'm sorry. Mom, as if sorry could erase the damage, as if it could wipe away the thousands owed, the shame that burned in my chest, the betrayal that hollowed me out. I wish I could tell you I forgave them right then, that I saw through their mistakes to the children I had once rocked to sleep. But something inside me cracked that night, something that had held strong through poverty, through Charles's eventual betrayal with another woman, through the loneliness of holding a household together on my own. That something shattered, and what replaced it was not forgiveness. It was fire. I became consumed with uncovering every lie, every secret, every debt they had placed upon me. I combed through paperwork, sat in sterile offices with lawyers, begged for mercy from creditors who looked at me like I was just another fool. The numbers stacked higher, and with them, so did my rage. My children didn't just borrow, they indulged. Vacations charged to my name, cars driven off lots with my signature scrawled across the bottom line. Credit cards maxed out on dinners and luxuries I had never even seen. And all of it carried my name, my credit, my future. The shame was unbearable. Neighbors whispered, friends avoided eye contact. I was the woman too blind to know her own flesh and blood had gutted her life while smiling at her across the dinner table. And the worst part was, I couldn't even bring myself to tell the full truth. How could I admit that my children, the very ones I worked myself raw to raise, had stolen not only my money, but my dignity? Nights became endless. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of their childhoods, searching for the place I went wrong. Did I give too much? Too little? Was I blind to their greed, their entitlement? Or did my sacrifices teach them only that I was a resource to be drained? And then, one night, as tears soaked my pillow, I felt something shift inside me. A voice, cold and resolute, whispered, They may have buried you in debt, but you will not drown. You will rise, and they will see what it means to betray the woman who gave them everything. It was then that revenge took root. Not revenge in the sense of violence or cruelty, but something sharper, something more fitting. A revenge woven from truth, from exposure, from letting the weight of their actions crash back onto their own shoulders. I would uncover every secret. I would reveal every lie. And I would not protect them anymore, not from the world, not from consequences, not even from themselves. The first step was silence. I stopped bailing them out when the calls came for overdue bills. I let them ring when Daniel begged for me to co-sign yet another loan. I shook my head, cold and steady. When Sarah wept about needing help with rent, I reminded her whose name was already drowning in collections, and when Michael couldn't look me in the eyes anymore, I held his gaze until he turned away. But silence wasn't enough. They had to feel it. They had to know what it meant to rip apart the life of the woman who had raised them. And so, I began to plan. What they didn't know was that I had kept journals every bill, every receipt, every date, every lie they told me. For years I had documented, partly out of habit, partly out of fear of forgetting. Now those journals became weapons. I compiled evidence. I spoke to lawyers. I reached out to people they owed, slowly, piece by piece. I stitched together the ugly truth of what my children had done. And with every page I turned, every memory I unearthed, I felt my resolve harden. They thought they had buried me, but in truth, they had unearthed something in me they never imagined the will to fight back. Not as a mother, but as a woman who would not be erased by betrayal. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that betrayal has layers like rot spreading beneath the surface of wood. You think it's just one crack, one mistake, and then you peel it back to find the decay has been there all along, silently devouring the foundation. The journals I kept simple-lined notebooks I once thought of as nothing more than a way to balance bills began to tell me a different story when I read them back with new eyes. I saw the patterns. Daniel's emergencies always coincided with weekends he claimed to be working overtime. Yet somehow, he was always short on money. Sarah's promises to pay me back next month stretched into years, each excuse more elaborate than the last, and Michael sweet. Quiet Michael, his betrayal hurt in the strangest way. He rarely asked for anything directly, but he had known, always known, what his siblings were doing, and he never stopped them. His silence was his crime. I began to collect more than just my journals. I went through old drawers, dusty shoe boxes, every corner of the house where scraps of paper had been left, receipts, loan documents, checks with my forged signature. All of it became part of a growing file. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a lawyer. Her name was Marissa, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who looked at me as if she'd seen too many mothers like me, too trusting, too forgiving, too easily fooled. She tapped the stack of documents I placed on her desk and shook her head. "You have a case," she said simply. "But you need to decide, do you want justice, or do you want reconciliation?" The question cut me. Justice meant exposure, possibly even prison for my children. Reconciliation meant swallowing this poison, pretending it was a bitter medicine, and hoping the sickness of their actions wouldn't kill me, for weeks. I wrestled with that choice, the word reconciliation echoing like a plea from the mother in me, while justice roared like a demand from the woman I had become. In the meantime, the calls didn't stop. Collectors hounded me day and night, voices cold and sharp as they reminded me of debts I didn't choose. Once, a man came to my door, a heavy knock that shook the wood, demanding payment for a car loan Daniel had defaulted on. I stood there, trembling, but I refused to let him inside. When I closed the door, I slid down to the floor and sobbed until my chest ached. The shame was suffocating, but underneath it burned something fiercer than sorrow. They had dragged me into this hell, but I would not remain here quietly. The breaking point came when I received notice of foreclosure on my home. My home, this little house I had worked 3 jobs at times to keep. where I had raised them, where every corner held memories of scraped knees and birthday cakes, where I had prayed through storms and laughed through holidays. Losing it meant losing the last piece of myself that hadn't already been stolen. I knew then reconciliation was no longer an option. Justice was the only road left. I told no one of my plan. I wore the mask of weary mother, nodding quietly when Sarah visited to borrow more money, listening when Daniel tried to explain away his failed business ventures, pretending not to notice Michael's guilt-ridden eyes when he sat at my table. But inside, I was sharpening the knife of truth. I began with Daniel. He had always been reckless, living as though consequences were myths invented by cautious people. I dug deeper into his finances, discovered he had been funneling loans through my name, not just for cars and trips, but for gambling debts. Gambling something Charles, his father, had once dabbled in before abandoning us. The curse had seeped down to my son, and he had buried me in it. Then Sarah. She had married young, to a man who promised her the world but left her with nothing but a baby and a mountain of disappointments. I pitied her once, but pity turned sour when I discovered she had used my credit to fund not survival, but vanity, designer handbags, salon treatments, a vacation to Cancun, all in my name. She had walked on sand while I lay awake counting pennies. And Michael, the one who had always seemed closest to me, the one whose silence once felt like loyalty. His betrayal was quieter, but crueler. He had co-signed loans behind my back, loans that went unpaid. He had stood in banks with my documents and said nothing, letting them believe I was the one agreeing. He had been my shadow, and yet he too had stolen my light. The weight of their betrayal sat like stones in my chest, but instead of breaking me, it fueled me. I returned to Marissa, my lawyer, with everything I had gathered. I want to proceed, I told her, my voice shaking but steady. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. It won't be easy. You'll lose more before you gain anything, and once you take this step, there's no going back. They'll hate you. I felt the sting of those words. Hate. The one thing I had never wanted from my children. But then I thought of the foreclosure notice, of the collectors, of the shame that had become my daily meal. They already killed the love I had for them. I whispered, hate is all that's left. The months that followed were a blur of courtrooms, paperwork, and confrontations that ripped through me like storms. I stood in front of judges, trembling, recounting every detail of how my children had forged, stolen, deceived. They sat there too, my children's faces twisted in denial, in anger, in shame. Daniel glared at me as though I had betrayed him. Sarah wept theatrically, begging for mercy. Michael couldn't even lift his head. Neighbors heard the whispers. Family members turned away. How could she drag her own children to court, they muttered. But none of them knew the nights I'd lain awake with fear crushing my chest. None of them knew what it felt like to lose everything because of the very people you raised. The climax came during one brutal hearing. Evidence was presented: my forged signatures, bank statements, receipts of their lavish spending. And then the judge turned to me, asking if I wished to press charges fully. My voice wavered, but I said it clearly. Yes. In that moment, I felt something break, not just in me, but in them. Daniel's face flushed with rage. Sarah's sobs grew louder. Michael's silence turned into a tremor that shook his shoulders. But I stood firm. For once, I wasn't just their mother. I was a woman demanding justice. The judgment came swiftly. Debts shifted back onto them, restitution ordered, accounts frozen. My home was spared for now, but the cost was heavy. They looked at me as though I was no longer their mother, as though by saving myself, I had killed the bond forever. When the gavel fell, I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt hollow. The silence that followed me home was unbearable. The house, once filled with the noise of children, now echoed only with ghosts. I had won, but at what price? It was in those empty nights that I began to realize revenge doesn't heal wounds, it only exposes them. Justice had been served, but the ache remained. I had stood up for myself, but I had also severed ties that could never be mended. My children hated me now, and perhaps they always would. Still, part of me knew this was necessary. Sometimes, the only way to survive betrayal is to let the truth destroy everything. Because what is built on lies cannot stand anyway. I tell myself that over and over as I sit at the same kitchen table where so many lies were spun, staring at the quiet walls, trying to make peace with the choices I made. The silence after the court battles was not peaceful, it was punishing. My phone, once ringing with requests, excuses, or empty promises, grew cold and still. Weeks passed without a single word from Daniel, Sarah, or Michael. The absence of their voices carved a deeper wound than their betrayal had. It was as if my decision in that courtroom had exiled me not only from their lives, but from my very identity as a mother. For 70 years, I had built my sense of self around being theirs. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every ounce of energy had been poured into raising them. And now, with one choice for survival, I had lost them. I walked through my home and touched the walls that had once echoed with laughter. Arguments, the sound of running feet. Now the air felt heavy, empty, and cold. I began to think back to when they were young, when the weight of life hadn't yet turned their innocence into greed. Daniel as a boy with scraped knees, beaming with pride after fixing a broken bicycle chain. Sarah's soft curls as she sat cross-legged on the floor. Her nose buried in books she could barely read, but insisted she understood. Michael's small hand slipping into mine at the grocery store, clinging to me as though I was his entire world. How could those same children have grown into the adults who forged my name, who shackled me with debt, who saw me as nothing but a means to an end? The questions tore at me at night. Guilt gnawed at my heart. Maybe it wasn't just their betrayal. Maybe it was my failure. Had I loved them wrongly? Had I given too much, or not enough? Had my sacrifices taught them only that my pain was their privilege? I tried to seek answers in prayer. I sat in the old wooden pews of our small church, the same place I once brought them on Sunday mornings, and whispered my confusion to God. The stained glass windows glowed with colored light, painting my wrinkled hands in hues of blue and red. Where did I go wrong? I asked the silence, but no answer came, only the echo of my own breathing, shaky and uneven, reminding me that some questions never yield comfort. Then one day, a letter arrived, not from a bank or a collector, but from Sarah. Her handwriting was still the same, a little loopy, as if she rushed through the words. My hands trembled as I opened it. She wrote that she hated me for humiliating her in court, for choosing strangers over blood. She said I had ruined her marriage because her husband now saw her as a thief, a fraud. She called me selfish, heartless, a woman who cared more about money than family. But near the end, her words shifted. She admitted that she had never thought I would stand up to them, that she had always assumed I would carry their mistakes, like I always had. And then, in one bitter line, she confessed, "You were too good of a mother. We took advantage because we knew you'd never fight back." I dropped the letter and sat stunned. Too good of a mother. The phrase looped in my head like a cruel riddle. Could love be too much? Could sacrifice become a weapon in the hands of the very people it was meant to protect? The weeks dragged on. Daniel stayed silent, though through whispers in town I learned he had sunk deeper into gambling, his debts now crushing him without my credit to hide behind. Michael, my quiet one, sent no letters, no calls. His absence hurt the most, because I had always believed he would return, even if the others did not. Then one night, I heard a knock at my door. My heart raced as I shuffled to open it. There stood Michael, his face gaunt, eyes hollowed by guilt. He looked older, as though the weight of silence had aged him years in just a few months. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. I stood there, torn between the urge to embrace him and the instinct to shut the door. "Why are you here?" "Michael," he lowered his eyes. "Because I can't carry it anymore. What we did, what I let them do. I thought staying quiet would protect you, but all it did was destroy you." I stared at him, my chest tight with rage and love tangled together. "You didn't just stay quiet," I said. "You helped them. You signed things. You stood there while they forged my name." Tears streamed down his face. "I know. I was weak. I didn't want them to hate me, so I let them use you, and I hate myself for it every day." The sight of his shame, his trembling hands, cut me open in ways I didn't expect. I wanted to scream, to push him away, but another part of me, still a mother, always a mother, ached to hold him, to soothe him like I had when he was a little boy. Instead, I sank into my chair, my strength gone. "You all broke me. Michael, do you understand that you didn't just put me in debt? You made me question my worth, my choices, my life. You took everything I was." He fell to his knees beside me, clutching my hand. "Then let me make it right. Please, I don't care if Daniel hates me. I don't care if Sarah never forgives me. I need to help you. Tell me what to do." For a long moment, I said nothing. The anger inside me warred with the part of me that still longed for connection, for redemption. Finally, I pulled my hand away. "It's too late to erase what you've done. But if you truly want to help, then stand on your own 2 feet. Take responsibility. Don't ever put me in a position where I'm paying for your sins again." He nodded through tears, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't known was still alive in me: hope. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the faintest chance that healing wasn't entirely impossible. Still, the damage lingered, even as Michael visited more often, helping with repairs around the house, sitting with me in the evenings. The ghost of betrayal haunted us. Every laugh felt fragile. Every shared meal tasted of ash. Trust, once broken, does not return easily. As for Daniel and Sarah, their distance hardened into bitterness. Daniel spread rumors that I was crazy, that the courts had manipulated me. Sarah told relatives I had abandoned her in her time of need, and though part of me wanted to defend myself, to shout the truth from the rooftops, another part of me was simply tired. I let them speak their lies. The people who mattered already knew the truth. And yet, Revenge still whispered to me at night. I had exposed them in court, but a darker part of me wanted more. I wanted them to feel what I had felt: the humiliation, the isolation, the crushing weight of shame. I fantasized about sending their employers copies of the court documents, about telling their friends, about ensuring they could never escape the shadow of what they had done. But every time the urge rose, I remembered Sarah's letter. "You were too good of a mother." Maybe revenge would give me satisfaction for a moment, but it would also prove her right that I was no longer a mother, only a woman consumed by bitterness. So I chose another path. I began to rebuild not my relationship with them, but my relationship with myself. I joined a support group for parents who had been betrayed by their children. I found solace in hearing others' stories, in realizing I was not alone in this strange, quiet grief. I picked up painting, something I had always wanted to try but never had time for. I let the colors flow from my brush like emotions too heavy to speak. And in the stillness of my evenings, I began to write again. Not just journals filled with numbers and debts, but letters to myself. Reminders that my worth was not tied to my children's choices, that my life had value beyond what they had taken from me. Michael's presence grew steadier. Though I kept him at arm's length, I needed him to prove his words with actions, and slowly. He did, but with Daniel and Sarah. The gap widened into an unbridgeable canyon. It hurt, every day, and yet, beneath the pain, a new strength was forming, a strength I never knew I had, forged not from being a mother, but from being a woman who had survived betrayal and chosen to stand anyway. When people ask me now if I regret taking my children to court, I never know how to answer. Regret is such a complicated word. Part of me aches every day for the love I lost, for the warmth that used to fill my home. But another part of me knows that if I hadn't stood up, if I had let them keep using me, I would have lost not only my house, my savings, my name, but myself. And once a woman loses herself, there is no getting her back. The months after Michael returned were a strange mixture of healing and heartbreak. He tried. I'll give him that. He came by to mow the lawn, to carry groceries, to fix the leaking faucet that had dripped for years. He asked about my day. He sat with me in silence when words were too heavy, and once or twice. I caught him watching me with the same boyish guilt that had haunted him since childhood. I could see he wanted forgiveness, but forgiveness is not a gift handed over like coins on a counter. It is a slow rebuilding, a bridge reconstructed brick by painful brick. I did not forgive him outright, but I let him stay close enough to prove himself. That, I think, was my way of leaving the door cracked, of giving at least one of my children a chance to return. With Daniel and Sarah, there was no such chance. They hardened their hearts, dug deeper into their bitterness. And when I heard of them in passing from neighbors, from cousins, it was always with a sting of sorrow. Daniel arrested once for fraud, Sarah moving from place to place, her marriage in shambles. And yet, neither of them called me. Neither of them wrote, except for that one venomous letter from Sarah. Sometimes I wonder if they hate me more for what I did, or if they hate themselves and cannot bear to face me. Perhaps it is both. But life has a way of continuing, even when the heart feels shattered. Seasons turned. I learned to fill my days with small rituals that reminded me I was still alive, still worthy of joy. I planted flowers in the garden, their blooms a defiant burst of color against the grayness that threatened to swallow me. I painted until my canvases were filled with messy swirls of pain and hope. I even began teaching reading classes at the library again, helping children discover the magic of words. It was there, among the innocent laughter of children who had not yet learned to betray, that I felt closest to healing. One evening, Michael brought me a letter. His hands shook as he placed it on the table. "It's from Daniel," he said softly. I froze. My chest tightened as though the air had been pulled from the room. Slowly, I unfolded the envelope. Daniel's handwriting was harsher than I remembered. Jagged strokes pressed too hard against the paper. He wrote that he blamed me for his downfall, that I had humiliated him, destroyed his chances of rebuilding. He said I had chosen pride over family, law over love, but near the end, just like Sarah's letter, there was a crack in the armor. He admitted he hadn't known how deep his gambling had gone until it swallowed him whole. He admitted that using my name had been the easy way out, because he knew I would never fight him. And then he confessed. In one broken line, I hate you for fighting me, but I hate myself more for making you fight. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I set the letter aside. It was not an apology, not really, but it was the closest thing Daniel had ever given me to honesty. Michael watched me quietly. "Do you want me to respond for you?" I shook my head. "No. If Daniel wants to talk, he'll come himself. Words on paper aren't enough anymore." He nodded, though I could see the sadness in his eyes. He wanted us whole again. But some families cannot return to what they were. Some wounds leave scars too jagged to smooth. Months later, I heard that Sarah had fallen ill. Word reached me through a cousin who still spoke to her. She had no stable job, no stable home, and the weight of her choices had eroded her health. I sat by the window that night, staring out at the moon, and wondered if she thought of me, if she remembered the nights I stayed awake by her bedside as a child when she had fevers, the way I pressed cool cloths to her forehead, whispering prayers into the dark. Did she remember that mother? Or was she only haunted by the woman who stood against her in court? It was then I realized the truth I had been running from. Revenge and justice are not the same. Revenge had burned in me like fire, and for a time, it kept me alive. But justice was the path I had chosen, and it had cost me the bond with my children. Yet neither path could give me back what I truly longed for, the innocence of motherhood before betrayal. So I began to search not for forgiveness from them, nor for revenge against them, but for peace within myself. I had to believe that my life had value beyond being their mother. I had to believe that, even broken, I was still whole. The years since then have been quieter. Michael still visits, though the guilt never fully leaves his eyes. Daniel and Sarah remain distant shadows, names that ache in my chest whenever I hear them spoken. But I have found ways to keep going. I have found a rhythm of survival, a song of resilience. And sometimes, when the evenings grow long and the house is still, I allow myself to dream not of reconciliation, not of things returning to what they were, but of freedom. Freedom from the chains of betrayal, freedom from the debts they placed on my name, freedom to live the last chapters of my life not as a victim, but as a woman who endured. I tell you this story not because I want pity, but because I know I am not alone. Somewhere out there, another mother lies awake, heartbroken by the very children she raised. Somewhere, another woman feels the sting of betrayal from those she sacrificed for. And to you, I say you are not weak for loving them, and you are not cruel for standing up to them. You are human. You are worthy of respect, even when those closest to you deny it. If my story holds any lesson, it is this: love is a gift, but it must never be given at the cost of your soul. Sacrifice is noble, but only when it is not exploited. And sometimes, the bravest thing a mother can do is to stop protecting her children from the consequences of their own choices. I look back now and see a life of contradictions, love and betrayal, sacrifice and theft, justice and sorrow. And yet, despite it all, I am still here, still breathing, still telling my story. That, perhaps, is the greatest revenge of all survival. So, if you're listening to this, if you've stayed with me through my tears and my trembling words, I ask you to carry this story with you. Let it remind you to guard your worth, to stand firm in your truth, to never let betrayal define you. And if my story moved you, if you found a piece of yourself reflected in my pain, I ask you, please share it. Share it so another mother, another father, another person broken by betrayal knows they are not alone. Like this video. Leave a comment with your own story. Subscribe so we can continue walking through these hard truths together. Because stories like these are not just mine, they are ours. They are the threads that bind us in this tapestry of survival, revenge, and hard-earned peace.